The room was ice cold, yet every seat was filled. Inside the Senate chamber, the official agenda sounded simple: a public hearing on the federal welfare budget. But anyone watching could feel it. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was about judgment. This was about power. At the front of the room, microphones blinked red. The words, "Committee on Federal Budget Allocations," loomed large on a banner behind the dais. Reporters leaned forward, pens hovering. Political aides whispered in corners. Everyone knew something big was about to go down. And at the center of it all, Senator Ted Cruz. Calm, polished, a smirk already forming. Across from him, quietly seated with a manila folder, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Silent, still. But there was something in her eyes, like she'd already seen the ending. This wasn't just another day in D.C. It was the calm before a political storm. And then the door opened. Ted Cruz stepped in, one hand adjusting his tie, the other gripping a leather-bound folder like it held the script to a play he thought he'd already mastered. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. The smirk on his face wasn't just confidence, it was assumption. Assumption that this room belonged to him, that this hearing would be another notch on his political belt, that the woman across from him, Jasmine Crockett, was nothing more than a footnote in his highlight reel. Reporters snapped photos. Some staffers smiled knowingly. They had seen this act before, and so had Cruz. He wasn't here to listen, he was here to perform. He slid into his seat like a king returning to court. Then he looked across the table straight at Jasmine, and that smirk deepened. To Ted Cruz, this wasn't a fight. It was already a victory. She didn't say a word. While Ted Cruz soaked in the lights and posed for the moment, Jasmine Crockett sat still, back straight, fingers gently resting on a closed manila folder. No camera lingered on her for long. She didn't need them to. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to prosecute. Her eyes followed Cruz, not with fear, not even with anger, but with something far more dangerous: calculation. She watched every smirk, every glance, every self-satisfied gesture, like a surgeon studying the rhythm of a patient's heart before cutting it open. She didn't blink much. She didn't shift in her seat. She just waited. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something Cruz didn't. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one shouting. It's the one quietly counting every lie. And she had come prepared, not to play defense, but to deliver a reckoning. Ted Cruz leaned in, adjusted his mic, and smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that comes right before a knife slips in. "Let's stop pretending this is about compassion," he said, voice steady, calculated. "We're feeding a generation of dependency." No one moved. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. He didn't glance at the room. His eyes stayed locked on Jasmine. Welfare has turned citizens into slaves of the state, tamed by handouts, stripped of ambition. Each sentence was measured, each word carefully sharpened. And none of it was really about policy. It was personal. Then came the twist of the knife. You may want to defend a lifestyle built on waiting for government checks, but my constituents still believe in earning their way, something you clearly wouldn't understand. A quiet gasp from one side of the room. Someone's pen paused mid-sentence, but Cruz kept going. "I don't expect you to grasp values like discipline or self-reliance," he added, voice colder now, "because clearly you were raised on subsidies and sentiment." He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The insult landed louder than a scream. And still, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. And then it happened. That moment. Ted Cruz still leaning back with that smug smile. Jasmine Crockett still perfectly still, hands folded, lips sealed. And their eyes met. It wasn't a stare down. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, sharper, older. It was the kind of look that says, "You don't know what's coming, but I do." And in that instant, the energy in the room shifted. The aides stopped whispering. The pens stopped moving. Even the blinking camera lights felt like they slowed. No one said a word. No one dared to. Because in that single locked glance, something unspoken passed between them. Not threat, not defiance, but inevitability. The room didn't gasp. It held its breath, waiting. And just when the room couldn't get any colder, Ted Cruz leaned forward again, this time with the air of a man about to deliver a punchline. He adjusted his cufflinks slowly, intentionally, then exhaled with exaggerated exhaustion. "I debated at Harvard," he said, voice laced with smugness. "And now I find myself across the table from a political actress from Twitter." He let the words hang in the air. A few people chuckled. Someone on his staff even smirked, but no one laughed, because deep down they all knew it wasn't just a joke. It was a dismissal, a coded message: she's not real, she doesn't belong. He tried to reduce her to a hashtag, a soundbite, a side character in his story. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to play anyone's role but her own, and she didn't blink. Cruz wasn't done. He never is until he draws blood. His voice dropped half an octave slower now, more surgical. "I don't expect you," he said, nodding toward Jasmine, "to truly understand values like discipline or self-reliance." He let that sink in. "Because clearly you were raised on subsidies and sentiment." There it was, not a policy debate, not even political theater, but an insult, a direct personal swipe at her upbringing, her community, her worth. And he said it like it was fact, like her childhood was a cautionary tale, like help made her weak. Some aides shifted uncomfortably. Even reporters lowered their pens. It was no longer about Jasmine. It was about everyone who's ever used food stamps. Every single mom who had to choose between rent and medicine. Every student who filled out FAFSA and still didn't have enough. Cruz spoke to belittle, but what he actually did was wake something up. Jasmine Crockett didn't move, but something in the room did. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't take the bait. Jasmine Crockett just waited. She let the silence thicken. Let the weight of Cruz's words hang rot and sour in the air. Then calmly, almost too calmly, she leaned forward, pressed her mic button, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." That was it. No counterattack, no drama. Just a sentence that somehow felt heavier than all of Cruz's grandstanding combined. Because everyone in the room knew what she meant. That wasn't gratitude. That was a verdict. It was the calm, surgical voice of someone who had already done the homework, who already had the documents, who already knew where this was going. Cruz blinked just once. Jasmine Crockett had just set the stage, and the curtain was about to rise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam anything down. She just reached for the folder. That manila file, the one that had sat untouched through the insults, the sneers, the smug declarations, was finally in her hands. Jasmine Crockett placed it gently on the table, opened the flap, and pulled out one sheet of paper. That's all it took. The energy in the room cracked. Laughter died. Side smirks vanished. Cruz stopped adjusting his sleeves, because everyone knew that posture. It wasn't the gesture of a politician. It was the gesture of a prosecutor. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at Cruz. She looked at the page, the one that had his name on it. Raphael Edward Cruz. Printed in bold, government letterhead. Dated. Sealed. The air went heavy. You could hear fabric shift. You could hear nothing. Because the moment that file touched the table, this stopped being performance and started becoming a reckoning. The cameras knew where to look, almost as if they were waiting for it. Slowly, silently, one of the Senate's broadcast cameras zoomed in on the top of the page in Jasmine's hand. And there it was, bold, undeniable, Rafael Edward Cruz federal loan recipient, dated, signed, on official federal letterhead. Not a rumor, not a smear, not a tweet, a document. Cruz's face didn't flinch, but his eyes did. The same man who just mocked millions for needing help was himself a beneficiary of the very system he called slavery. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The screen said it for her. The silence did the rest. In that moment, Cruz wasn't debating. He was exposed. And every viewer at home watching on C-SPAN or YouTube knew exactly what they were seeing. Not a contradiction. A confession written in ink. She finally spoke, but not with fire, not with fury. She spoke like someone reading a receipt. According to public records, Jasmine began holding up the document for the room to see, Senator Rafael Edward Cruz received approximately $60,248 in federal student loans. She flipped the first page. Used to attend two of the most elite institutions in the world, Princeton University and Harvard Law School. So while you stand here today, Senator, scorning families who rely on public assistance, you yourself once relied on the very same government you now mock, not just for food, but for your Ivy League education. A gasp echoed from somewhere near the back row. Because this wasn't political anymore. It was surgical. Every sentence a scalpel. Every number a scar. Cruz didn't look up. And Jasmine didn't slow down. Jasmine turned the next page slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at Cruz. And while we're discussing public assistance, I think it's only fair we mention the $280,000 small business relief package awarded to one Rafael Bienvenido Cruz, the senator's uncle, during the post-2008 recovery initiative. Gasps, shifting chairs, a pen dropped in the press row. It was an SBA loan, Small Business Administration, part of a federal program designed to help businesses get back on their feet. She placed the paper beside the first one. So let's be clear, while Senator Cruz lectures working mothers on self-reliance, his Ivy League tuition was federally funded, and his uncle was rescued by a taxpayer-funded bailout. She leaned back. And still no attack, no theatrics, just one truth after another. One government stamp at a time. Jasmine picked up a folded article, old, yellowed at the edges, but clear as sunlight. According to an archived piece from the Houston Chronicle, she said, Senator Cruz's father, Rafael Cruz, lived in government-subsidized housing in Texas during the early years of raising his family. She let that settle, then flipped the article over. And his mother, Eleanor Dara, received federal education assistance under a Reagan-era initiative designed to help working mothers re-enter college. Silence. Even Cruz's staffers stopped typing. "Let me be very clear," Jasmine said calmly. "There is nothing wrong with needing help. What's wrong is pretending you never did, and using your platform to shame others for walking the exact same path your family once walked. It wasn't just a political trap, it was a mirror, and Cruz was face to face with it now. She didn't need to say another word. The papers were enough. The names were enough. The numbers were more than enough. Now there was just the room. And the room had changed. Staffers looked down. Some shifted awkwardly in their seats. A few senators pretended to read notes they weren't even holding. The crowd of journalists didn't type. They just watched. Then, like instinct, the cameras began to turn. One by one, the lenses pivoted toward Ted Cruz. No one called his name. No one told him to respond. But all eyes waited. Not for a comeback. Not for a joke. But for a reaction. Would he deny? Would he deflect? Would he walk out? He didn't. Because what do you say when everything you've used to shame others has your own family's name on it? She waited, just long enough for the silence to feel loud. Then she leaned forward, not aggressive, not angry, just clear, just surgical. Why is it, Jasmine said slowly, that when you were poor, it was called opportunity? She paused, letting the word breathe. But when others are poor, working 2 jobs, raising kids, begging for health care, you call it mooching? You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Even Cruz didn't move, because there was no good answer. And she wasn't asking just for herself. She was asking for every single mother who got shamed at the grocery store, for every teenager told they'd never succeed, for every American who hears welfare and is treated like they're trash. This wasn't a question. It was a mirror. And Ted Cruz was looking into it alone. The silence had stretched too long, and Cruz couldn't take it. He straightened his back, adjusted his tie, and finally spoke. Yes, I received federal loans, and yes, I paid them back in full. That's called responsibility, Congresswoman. I didn't abuse the system like some of the people you seem so eager to defend. A few Republican aides nodded quietly, but the energy in the room didn't shift. If anything, it turned colder. Because the message was clear. If you can't repay, if you're drowning in interest, if your kid is sick and rent is due, then to Ted Cruz, you're abusing the system. There was no empathy, no understanding, just a smirk and a receipt. But Jasmine didn't interrupt. She just looked at him like she was watching a man dig his own grave, one polished sentence at a time. No raised voice, no snarky comeback, no dramatic monologue. Just paper. Jasmine reached for the final page in her folder, a sheet thin enough to crinkle in her hand, but heavy enough to crush a narrative. She held it up facing the committee. This is from the Texas Public Access Initiative, she said calmly. It's a sworn affidavit dated 6 years ago from a single mother in El Paso who applied for child care assistance while working full-time and attending night school. The paper trembled slightly, not from her hand, but from the AC humming above. She made $11.50 an hour. She never missed a payment, never asked for a deferment. But because she fell behind 1 month, she was labeled a fraud risk and banned from future support. Then Jasmine turned and looked straight at Cruz. Tell me, Senator, where was her opportunity? Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't smirk. She didn't say a single word. She simply raised the affidavit and held it up to the camera. Direct, unshaking, intentional. The document filled the screen on every news network covering the hearing. A name, a case number, a quote, labeled high risk for requesting help during a medical emergency. There were no monologues, no moral grandstanding, only silence and undeniable evidence. The kind of truth you can't unhear, the kind of pain you can't unsee. And across the room, Ted Cruz sat frozen. Words were his weapon, but now words had lost all power. The video feed had no delay. What Jasmine did, what she held up, was already spreading. One clip, one affidavit, and a nation full of stories waiting for permission to be angry. The live stream chat was a flood. Wait, he got federal loans? And he's talking down to people? I got denied help last year with 2 kids, but he got Harvard paid for? If Cruz got help, why wasn't I worth it too? Some wrote in all caps, some just dropped crying emojis. Others told their own stories, stories Cruz would never read, but that would be screen captured and shared by millions. This wasn't just about policy anymore, it was personal. The moment Jasmine lifted that document, a dam broke. And Ted Cruz, he wasn't facing a committee anymore. He was facing America's memory. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't need to. Jasmine just looked at him, not with rage, but with something worse: clarity. "You were lifted," she said, "by what you now want buried." No one spoke. Not Cruz, not the chair, not a single aide moved. Because that line hit different. It wasn't an insult. It was an obituary for the moral ground Cruz had just lost. This man who went to Harvard on public loans, whose family survived on assistance, who became a senator off that foundation, now wanted to erase the ladder behind him. Jasmine didn't call him a hypocrite. She didn't have to. She just let the truth do the talking. And across living rooms in Ohio, diners in Alabama, barbershops in Detroit, people whispered the same words. She didn't yell, but damn, she spoke. It started as a routine committee hearing, but within 60 minutes, it had become a national reckoning. The clip of Jasmine's line, "You were lifted by what you now want buried," was uploaded by 3 political interns before Cruz even left his seat. It hit Twitter, then TikTok, then Reddit, then CNN. By the end of the hour, 1.2 million views. Hashtag lifted then buried trending in all 50 states. Even Fox News anchors stunned silent on live TV. Every reaction video was the same. "Oh no, oh my God, she cooked him." That man just got obliterated by a sentence. This is history. We're watching history. And Ted Cruz, still sitting in the same chair, face stiff, scrolling his phone, as he watched himself lose the narrative not in a debate, but in the court of public truth. The floodgates didn't just open, they shattered. After Jasmine's clip hit 1 million views, everyday Americans responded in the only way they could, by posting their pain. A nurse from Kansas uploaded her ER bill, $2,940 for 6 stitches. "I make $21 an hour." Cruz calls this entitlement. A grad student in Georgia posted a screenshot, $130,872 in federal loans. No forgiveness, no mercy, just interest. A veteran posted his food stamp rejection letter, but I guess Cruz's uncle gets SBA money. Cool. Within 24 hours, hashtag show your receipts was trending. Instagram became a gallery of injustice. TikTok turned into testimony. And something was happening. This wasn't pity, this was anger with evidence. Shame was turning into strength. He didn't look like a protester. He wasn't shouting in the streets. He sat in his garage, a folded flag behind him, a military photo on the wall. "My name is Marcus James," he said. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home with injuries they can't see." He leaned forward, eyes steady on the camera. "I didn't ask for a handout. I asked for physical therapy. I asked for sleep medication. I asked to not feel broken every damn morning." Then his voice dropped, soft but sharp. "They told me funding got cut. Said my case wasn't urgent." A pause. "And now I watch Ted Cruz call people moochers for needing help. Let me say this clear. I am not a moocher. I am a citizen who paid in advance." No music, no edits, just raw truth. The video hit 3 million views in 6 hours. Because in that one moment, America saw not just policy, but betrayal. The veteran's voice still echoed, but the internet had already moved to its next phase, unification. Out of all the live streams, receipts, testimonies, one line stood out. It wasn't long. It wasn't loud, but it was true. If Cruz deserved help, why didn't we? That single sentence showed up on protest signs in Houston, on T-shirts in Chicago, projected on a courthouse in Oakland, spray-painted under an overpass in Queens. Politicians gave speeches. Celebrities tweeted it. But for everyday Americans, it was more than a slogan. It was a wound they finally had words for. Jasmine never tweeted the phrase. She didn't have to. The people made it theirs. And Ted Cruz, he tried to explain, tried to shift, tried to spin, but every interview, every post, got drowned out by 6 words that spoke louder than his entire career. CNN aired the clip 6 times in 24 hours. MSNBC called it the most brutal 72 seconds in Senate history. Even Fox News had to acknowledge Crockett's words can't be dismissed. The New York Times ran a Sunday headline in bold, "A reckoning, not a debate." Editorials followed. What America saw was not just Cruz losing composure, but losing the right to define morality. Crockett didn't destroy a man, she exposed a system. On college campuses, professors played the clip in ethics classes. In living rooms, families talked about it at dinner. Even conservative veterans called into radio shows saying, "She didn't shout, she just told the truth we've lived." This wasn't political theater anymore. It was a mirror, and millions of Americans saw themselves in it. There were no more jabs, no final monologue, no pivot, no spin. Just 5 words spoken with a voice that had once electrified Senate chambers. "I yield the remainder of my time." No eye contact, no smirk, just silence. Camera zoomed in. His hands gripped the edge of the desk. His shoulders sank, not from fatigue, but from the weight of a mirror finally turned toward him. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just closed her folder. Because this wasn't a victory, it was a verdict. And as the gavel struck, the audience both in the chamber and online knew they had just witnessed something far rarer than outrage. They had witnessed accountability. The gavel had barely struck when it began. Senators gathered their papers fast. Staffers whispered. Phones lit up with headlines. But something was different. There were no congratulations, no backslaps. No one extended a hand to Jasmine Crockett. One Republican senator stood turned and adjusted his tie 3 times just to avoid eye contact. Another, who had shouted the loudest earlier, walked right past her with his eyes fixed on the floor. Even the Democrat next to her, the one who usually offered post-hearing pleasantries, simply nodded and looked away. Why? Because this wasn't just a takedown, it was a reckoning. And everyone in that room felt it pressing on their own silence. Jasmine didn't chase their approval. She didn't need it. She walked out of that room with something else, a country behind her, and a truth that refused to stay quiet. The next morning, Jasmine checked her inbox. 3 emails from donors. "We respect your passion, but feel the tone was divisive." One statement from a longtime supporter, "We must remain civil even when disagreeing with Senator Cruz." Even her campaign manager hesitated when she called, "It's not about the facts, Jasmine, it's how you made them feel." She sat alone in her office, the folder from the hearing still on her desk, untouched. One by one, the phone calls stopped. The endorsements went silent. The political class, sensing discomfort, began to distance itself from the truth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was proof that integrity has a cost. And for Jasmine, that cost wasn't a vote. It was trust. But she didn't fold. She didn't rage. She just whispered to herself, "So this is how it always begins." While politicians backed away, the people stepped in. That week, the ACLU released a nationwide statement. When the truth becomes too uncomfortable for Congress, it becomes a duty for the people. MoveOn.org followed with a viral video, Black mothers, veterans, students, grandparents, all saying the same line one after another. Welfare is not a crime. Survival is not shame. SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, launched a full campaign, digital billboards in 12 states, hashtags trending on X and TikTok, protest toolkits for student organizers. News anchors tried to remain neutral, but even they couldn't ignore the headlines. Crockett sparks national reckoning on class and morality. What Jasmine started was now a movement. And this time it wasn't just about Ted Cruz. It was about every working family told to do better while begging just to survive. No more whispers, no more shame. This time America would say it out loud. It started with one video. A woman in Detroit holding her EBT card to the camera. "This fed my children when no one else would, and I'm not ashamed." Then came more. A Gulf War veteran posted an old photo, oxygen tube, hospital bed, and his caption, "They said I was milking the system. I say I bled for it." A teacher from West Virginia stood outside her crumbling classroom. "This school runs on government lunch, so does my son, and I'll never apologize for that again." Tens of thousands followed. Hashtags trended, "My welfare story." Hashtag proud to survive. Hashtag we are not mooching. What Jasmine had sparked in that room was now being echoed in every corner of the country. These weren't sob stories, they were survival stories. And survival in a broken system is not weakness, it's resistance. The auditorium was packed. Not a single phone rang, not a single cough. Just Jasmine Crockett standing alone at the podium, no slides, no teleprompter, just her voice and the weight of truth. She didn't talk about Cruz. She didn't even mention Congress. She talked about her mother, a woman who worked nights cleaning motel bathrooms so Jasmine could one day afford to speak for those who were never heard. She told the crowd, "We are taught to be ashamed of needing help. But help is not a weakness, it is the seed of every dream you're about to grow." And then she held up her mom's old food stamp card, faded, torn, edges curled from time. "This," she said, "paid for my first school lunch. And now I speak in rooms that tried to silence us." The room didn't erupt, it fell still. Hundreds of students, tears sliding down faces, heads bowed, hands clutching their own truths. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they remembered. And in that silence, a generation understood survival was never shame. It was their legacy. After her speech, Jasmine didn't head to the green room. She stepped down into the crowd. There, in the second row, sat a first-year student, thin, nervous, wearing shoes too small and a blazer too big. Jasmine had read her letter that morning. No father, mother cleaning homes, 2 jobs, perfect GPA. She walked to the girl, held out a white envelope. The student reached for it with trembling hands. On the front, handwritten in thick black ink, "This is yours." She opened it slowly. Inside, a full scholarship funded anonymously. The room silent again. The girl cried. Jasmine held her. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not just money, not just hope, but inheritance. "When no one gave to me, I survived," Jasmine whispered. "But now we don't survive. We pass it on." As Jasmine stepped away from the podium, no one stood. No one clapped. They just breathed. Deep, trembling, aching breaths. The kind you only take when you've been holding pain for too long. A professor wiped her eyes. A janitor in the back crossed his arms, tears tracing lines down his cheeks. A student hugged her backpack like it was a lifeline. No chants, no headlines, just healing. And in that silence, Jasmine felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Not because she'd won. Not because Cruz had lost. But because, for once, the shame didn't win. And when she looked up, the student with the scholarship was standing at the edge of the stage, waiting not for another speech, but for a hug. That hug would last only 11 seconds, but it would undo generations of silence. The crowd remained seated. Jasmine didn't wave. She didn't look back. She simply walked. Past the podium, past the camera cranes, past the eyes still wet with truth. The camera caught it all. Her silhouette framed by the doorway light pouring in behind her, casting a long, quiet shadow across the floor. One woman, one message, 1,000 hearts changed. And just before the doors closed, a little girl no older than 10 slipped her hand into her mother's and whispered, "She looks like a superhero." No one argued. A week later, the clip aired on every major network. But it wasn't the confrontation with Cruz they replayed, it was just one sentence, spoken softly, almost like a prayer. Sometimes the most radical act is to believe someone is worth saving before the world does. No music, no graphics, just her voice trembling, sure and whole. And for once, America didn't argue, because in those few words, people saw themselves as children once helped, as adults still struggling as humans worthy of grace. And Jasmine, she didn't trend, she transcended. Life doesn't always reward those who scream the loudest, but those who speak the truth when it's hardest. Jasmine didn't win with anger. She won with facts, with silence, and with unshakable dignity. This story teaches us that compassion is not weakness, that help is not shameful, and that the people we try to silence often carry the wisdom that could save us all. In a world rushing to judge who deserves help, be the one who remembers what it means to give it. If this story moved you even for a second, then don't just scroll away. Subscribe now to join a community that values truth, dignity, and the fight for justice. Because the next time someone like Jasmine stands up, you'll want to be here to witness it. Hit that button, stay informed, and help us make sure the mic never gets turned off on voices that matter.